In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Just like every year, this year too, when the month of Ramadan arrived, I told my poor sister that she should come to my house for iftar. Both of my sisters were married, but one of them was not in a good situation, and since she lived in our neighborhood, I would often call her over. Today, my sister had come to our house, and what I feared happened. For the past hour, I had been listening to my sister's complaints as she cried, repeatedly showing me the face of her young daughter. A long scratch marked her cheek. Wiping her tears, she said, "Look, brother, if your wife does not like me coming here, then just tell me clearly. I will accept that with the death of our parents, my maternal home was also buried in the ground. Your wife has marked my child's face." Hearing these words from my elder sister, I was devastated. How could an honorable brother like me tolerate his sisters leaving his house in tears? I felt ashamed and started apologizing to Emreen Baji. "This is your brother's home, and I personally invited you for iftar. I was just very busy at the office today, so I broke my fast there, which is why I got late in coming home. But now, listening to these grievances at home, my head felt like it would explode from the pain." As soon as my sister left, I called out angrily to my wife, but despite my repeated calls, she did not come out. Furious, I marched toward the room. Seema was lying on the bed, asleep. Seeing her sleeping so peacefully only fueled my anger further. Because of her, my sister had left my home crying. She had marked the innocent face of my niece, and here she was, sleeping without a care in the world. Without thinking, I pulled the blanket off her and in the next moment, grabbed her hair tightly and jerked her up violently. She had been in a deep sleep, so the sudden attack caused her to lose her balance, and she fell face first onto the floor. A cry of pain escaped her lips. Frightened, she called my name and asked, "What has happened to you?" Seema's body was burning with fever, and her eyes were red from its intensity. But I, as if bloodlust had taken over me, I grabbed her by the hair and one after another, slapped her across the face. Her lips had already split open from hitting the floor, and now blood began to flow from her nose as well. Terrified, she covered her face with her hands and whimpered, "Shakil, what have I done that you're beating me like this?" I felt no pity for her condition. Instead, her innocence only fueled my anger further. I reminded her of everything my sister had told me. She was shocked and fell at my feet sobbing, "Shakil, swear upon me, I did nothing intentionally." When I was preparing food for iftar, your niece picked up a matchbox and tried to set her clothes on fire. If I had wasted even a moment, she would have lit the match. I quickly snatched the matchbox from her hand, and in the process, the edge of my nail accidentally grazed her face. Even after hearing this from my wife, my anger did not subside. Who was she to lay a hand on my niece? My love for my sister had completely consumed me. I grabbed the same hand of Seema's, the one with the long nails, and dragged her to the kitchen. I lit the stove and forced her hand, with those long nails, near the flames. She screamed in agony, begging for mercy, but I felt nothing for her. The heat of the fire burned not just her nails, but also her fingers. She writhed in pain, yet I felt a deep satisfaction inside. Leaving her there, I went back to my room and immediately called my sister. With a proud tone, I told her that I had punished my wife for what she had done, and that she would never dare to do anything like that again. Hearing this, my sister was delighted, and said, "You are the best brother in the world." It is brothers, like you, who make sure their sisters never feel the absence of their parents. Just never be swayed by your wife's words. Hearing my sister's words, my chest swelled with pride, and I felt a deep sense of peace within. I lay down on my bed and fell asleep without a second thought for my wife, whose body was burning with fever and whom I had mercilessly, after throwing her to the floor and raining slaps upon her, I had finally burned her hand as well. Throughout the night, I kept hearing the sound of her muffled sobs, but I remained indifferent and slept soundly. When I woke up at dawn for suhoor, I immediately sat up. I was a man who prayed 5 times a day and observed fasting regularly. It was always my priority that no matter what happened in the world, I should never miss my prayers or my fasts. I quickly got up, and when I looked at the bed, my wife was not there. She was in the kitchen preparing suhoor for me with her burnt hands. One of her hands was still intact, and with that, she was making my meal. After eating, I performed ablution and headed towards the mosque, but for the first time while offering my prayers, I did not feel at peace. It felt as if something was lost, as if an unsettling restlessness had taken root in my heart. Nevertheless, I completed my prayers and returned home. When I entered, I saw my wife sitting on the prayer mat, making supplications. Her back was turned toward me, and my eyes unconsciously fell on her burnt hand. For a moment, a faint wave of pain stirred in my heart, but perhaps at that time, my love for my sisters overpowered any concern for my wife. I completely ignored her and started getting ready for work. The next day, I arranged another dinner for both of my sisters and specifically instructed my wife to prepare their favorite dishes. This time, she silently obeyed my every command without uttering a single complaint, carrying out all the work quietly and diligently. In the evening, when it was time for iftar, Seima, despite her exhaustion, kept running back and forth, serving food to everyone. She was keeping an eye on everyone, ensuring that each person got what they needed. My sisters would ask her for things or sometimes find faults in the food. She listened to them silently every time and complied with their requests without question. Once my sisters became engrossed in their meal, Seima sat their children down beside her and started feeding them, while I enjoyed lighthearted conversations with my sisters and their husbands. After they all left for their respective homes, I turned around and looked at the house. It seemed like a zoo to me at that moment. Seima had not yet eaten. First, she cleaned the entire house, and then she went to the kitchen to have her meal. When she took too long, I followed her there. She was eating stale bread with salad, because all the food prepared for the dinner had been taken home by my sisters. After they finished eating, I offered to order something for her from outside, but she immediately refused and continued eating the stale bread with salad. That day, for the first time, I felt a sense of shame for my behavior. Her burnt hand was wounded, and she was struggling to take each bite. Her eyes were moist, and pain was evident on her face. Seeing her expression made me feel uneasy. Though I didn't want to put her on a pedestal, I couldn't ignore the situation entirely. A few peaceful days passed, and once again, my sisters started coming over with their children, spending entire days at my house. Seima had prepared an excellent iftar for them. I knew my sister's temperament well, just as I understood Seima's nature. I assumed that the beating I had given her had now taught her a lesson, but perhaps that was my misconception. That day, I returned home earlier than usual, before iftar. Seeing me, my sisters' expressions grew serious, and they seemed quite troubled. When I asked them what was wrong, they took turns complaining about my wife. Seima had, once again, spoken to them in a sarcastic tone, making comments about how they frequently barged into our home uninvited and even scolded the children. Hearing my sister's words, I was furious. After all the beating I had given her last time, she still hadn't learned her lesson. In my heart, my sisters held an irreplaceable place. There was no way my wife could ever reach that level. I never had any deep attachment to Seima to begin with. She was just Mish was the girl chosen by my late mother, and Seima was an orphan, raised by her grandfather after her parents passed away in an accident. This 20-year-old girl appeared very innocent on the outside, but what she had been doing with my sisters in my absence was something I could not tolerate. My sisters had provoked me to such an extent that when she left for her house that night, I picked up a stick from the house and went to Seima's room. She was lying on the bed, asleep. Without any words, I started beating her with the stick. Suddenly, in her sleep, she startled awake and fell from the bed onto the floor. But I was at a point where I was overwhelmed with cruelty, and my emotions were numb. When Seima fully regained consciousness and saw me hitting her, she fell to my feet, begging for mercy. She promised she would never again go near my sisters. After beating her so much, my hands were tired. It felt as if the joint in my wrist had shifted. I couldn't imagine the condition of that fragile body, enduring so many blows from a man like me, a man in full health, using all his strength. The next day, when my sisters found out, they were overjoyed and praised me. For me, it was enough that my sisters were pleased with my actions. Slowly, time passed, and my feelings of love and affection for my wife began to fade. She started feeling like an addition to the house, or perhaps just a presence whose sole purpose was to manage my responsibilities and take care of the house. My sisters started coming to my home every other day, and Seima still arranged everything for them as she had before, but now she was limping. Her foot had swollen badly, but I still felt anger toward that woman. What kind of woman was she? In my presence, she took such great care of my sisters and nieces, even breaking morsels of food and feeding them. Yet, in my absence, she treated them like animals. It had been 2 years since I married Seima, but she had never made a single request of me. I couldn't even remember the last time she had addressed me directly. But since my sisters were happy, it didn't matter much to me. One day, when I returned home from work, I was shocked to see the scene before me. Seima, in a fit of anger, had pushed my younger sister, causing her to fall. If I hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen face first onto the floor. Seeing me there, Seima's eyes widened in shock, while my sister, sobbing, clung to my chest and said, "Did you see that, brother? Did you see what your wife did? And you married her. The girl who looks so innocent and decent in front of you treats us like this when you're not around." The moment I heard my sister's words, my patience ran out. Right then and there, I began beating Seima. She kept crying, folding her hands, begging for a chance to explain herself. She repeatedly placed her hands over her stomach, trying to stop me, but that only fueled my anger further. Until today, she had never tried to stop me from hitting her. But now, her constant attempts to protect her stomach made me lose control. Without any hesitation, I struck her stomach several times with a stick. She writhed in pain, semi-conscious, blood streaming from her nose and mouth. She clutched her stomach, sobbing uncontrollably, but I felt no pity for her. Leaving her in that suffering state, I kicked her aside and took my sister to my room. My younger sister sat in the corner while Seima, still semi-conscious, groaned in pain, repeatedly asking for water, but I ignored her and remained focused on wiping my sister's tears. I told my sister very clearly that I no longer had any attachment to Seima. Her only status in this house was that of a servant. I asked her to find me another girl as soon as possible because I wanted to remarry. It seemed as though my sisters had been waiting for this very moment. They lit up with excitement. Seima somehow managed to drag herself to her room. I don't know what kind of heart I had developed that even seeing my wife in such a miserable state didn't stir any sympathy within me. My sisters were searching for a match for me, and to torment Seima further, they deliberately spoke about my second marriage in front of her. At first, Seima ignored their words, but one day, when my sister formally brought a girl to introduce me to, her expression was worth seeing. The girl was my sister's friend, modern, beautiful, and elegant, but there was no doubt that my wife had once been even more beautiful than her. However, now I couldn't even bear to look at Seima's face, bruises and wounds scattered all over, disheveled hair, and eyes always filled with tears. Just seeing her like that made me furious. My elder sister went into Seima's room to tell her that my marriage had been finalized. The moment she heard this, Seima, like a starving tigress, grabbed my sister by the throat and screamed, "Don't you dare. I will endure every cruelty, but I will not let you take my husband from me. Shakil is mine and only mine. I will not let him belong to anyone else." Instead of seeing Seima's emotions and pain, all I saw was her rudeness toward my sister. That day, I beat her so severely that my own body trembled from the effort. I threw her against the wall multiple times, so hard that even the wall was stained with her blood. I used all my strength to crush her beneath my feet. Eventually, even her screams of pain faded away. By then, my sisters had already left for their homes. Right when I had started beating her, Seima had lost consciousness and lay lifeless on the ground. My hatred for her had grown so intense that her very existence now disgusted me. Who was this girl to dare raise her hand against my sisters? I grabbed her by the hair, dragged her across the floor, and threw her out of the house. Even after all that, my anger was so overwhelming that I still couldn't find peace. I poured cold water over my head to cool myself down, then collapsed onto my bed, breathing heavily. Just then, my eyes fell on a diary peeking out from beneath the pillow. I picked it up and opened the first page. Written in an exquisitely beautiful script were the words, Seima Shakil. A surge of anger rose within me. I wanted to tear the diary into pieces. Filled with hatred, I began ripping out its pages one by one. But suddenly, my eyes froze on a few lines on one of the pages. "I wish, Shakil, you had given me a chance to explain. Today was supposed to be the most precious day of our lives. You were going to become a father. But do you know? Your sisters destroyed our happiness in an instant." I excitedly told them that I was expecting, that I was going to be a mother. But instead of sharing my joy, they started attacking my character. They called me immoral. A woman can tolerate everything, but she cannot endure insults directed at her innocent child. And neither could I. That is why, For the first time, I pushed them away. But Shaquille, what did you do? You, with your own hands, killed our happiness. You took the life of our child before they could even come into this world. As I read those words, my head started spinning. What kind of revelation was this? In a panic, I gathered the torn pages and started reading them one by one. Every word was drenched in pain. Every page painted me as the oppressor and Seima as the victim. Every atrocity was mine, and the only ones responsible for inciting me were my sisters. The more I read, the more tears streamed down my face. Again and again, I closed the diary and then reopened it, unable to believe what I was reading. After I left for work, my sisters would come to my house and treat my wife like a servant. She was an orphan. She had no guardian, no one to defend her. My sisters had crossed every limit to make her look bad in my eyes. I couldn't read anymore. I shut the diary and broke down into uncontrollable sobs. Seima lay unconscious outside the house, but I had no strength left to reach her. When I stepped out of my room, I saw blood splattered everywhere. The walls, the floor, everything was soaked in her blood. I don't know what kind of sin I had unknowingly committed. In my blind love for my sisters, I had forgotten that she too was someone's sister, someone's daughter. Did she not feel pain? Did she not suffer? With trembling hands I opened the door, and there Seima lay unconscious. I picked her up and brought her inside, trying desperately to wake her, but she remained unresponsive. I immediately rushed her to the hospital, but the doctor's words shattered my world. You are too late. She passed away half an hour ago. No. How could Seima leave like this? For the first time, a voice inside me screamed that despite everything, she could not have left me. My sisters sat beside Seima's lifeless body, wailing loudly. But I knew it was all for show, just a performance for the world. A little later, I carried Seima's coffin on my shoulders to the graveyard. With trembling hands, I poured the final handful of soil over her grave. In a single day, my entire world had been destroyed. When I returned home, my sisters were still sitting there. At that very moment, I severed all ties with them and threw them out of the house. Even then, they were cursing Seima, yet shedding tears in front of the world. I divided my inheritance, gave them their share, and cut them out of my life forever. But peace never returned to me. I went straight to the police station and confessed to my crime. I killed my wife. The court sentenced me to life imprisonment. Now, I sit behind bars. The same sisters for whom I would have given my life visited me only once. It has been 6 months, and no one has come to see me. Even now, Seima's diary lies open in front of me. At the end of every page, she had written, Shaquille, my love is silent. I long for the day when you will understand my silent love, when you will trust me. But now, I fear only one thing, the day of judgment, when I will be held accountable for what I did to Seima.